I'd like to start off showing this map of the United States, or showing two different types of maps. This first map is considered a physical map, where the physical map shows just the physical characteristics of the land, or the landmass. For instance, on the east coast of the United States, you have the Appalachian Mountains, and on the Midwest or the West Coast, the mountains you see are the Rocky Mountains, and in between you see all of these rivers, right? And then you have the lakes up to the north. So a political map is a little bit different, whereas the political map shows all of the states in between each area. You don't see the mountains, you don't see the lakes, you don't see the rivers. You just simply see like the state line. So we have the physical map, which is essentially just the the geography of it, and the political map shows the states. Now, knowing about geography in the U.S. history regions, there's certain things we need to know, like the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, how they influence foreign policy from the 18th and 19th and 20th century. And the oceans to the east and west coast helped the U.S. maintain its foreign policy of neutrality during much of the 1800s. And simply, the reason why it is able to be neutral is because the space or the distance in between from the United States itself to that of Europe and Africa and Asia. That's why the United States was able to be neutral and not stay out of a lot of those wars that were happening in there. Also, you got to understand about the geography of North America. More like the United States, more in particular, is that natural harbors contributed to the development of commerce, and commerce is essentially the exchange of goods and commodities, especially on a large scale between different countries. So, if you're trading between, Europe and United States, you would say that's going to be what's the foreign commerce of it. And anyway, so the Appalachian Mountains, they served as a western boundary for British colonial settlements during the Revolutionary War. Now, if you see, although we know that the Appalachian Mountains are on the East Coast, when it says that it created a western barrier or western boundary, simply because when I say they, the colonists came off from Europe and they landed on the coast lines, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But when they landed on the coastlines here, they couldn't go past the mountains because it was a barrier. And usually, you learn that in global studies, is that usually the landmass, or like mountains and rivers and stuff, kind of separate cultures. So the colonists were separated from the Native Americans. But when they finally found a way to get through the mountains or around the mountains, they loved this area over here, which is the Ohio River Valley. And in the Ohio River Valley, a lot of the Native Americans, some people call them Indians, but the Native Americans were living over there. And France were allies with the Native Americans. And the Native Americans didn't like the fact that colonists were coming in and trying to take over their land. So France came in and was trying to like say, "Hey, what are you doing? You can't come over here." So the colonists told their friends, which is essentially Great Britain, and Great Britain sent the troops and defeated France. And as a result, France came up with something called the Proclamation Line, France lost, so British came up with the Proclamation Line in a sense, and told the colonists, "Hey, do not pass this barrier at all." So when you see the mountains, you stay along the coast. I guess simply because it was just too much area to cover for Great Britain. So Great Britain just like, "Hey, colonists, just stay where we want you to stay." But the colonists who were living there, they wanted more places to farm or grow. I mean, whatever they wanted to do, they just wanted to travel more of the land. They wanted to go more inland. So, but because these were British colonies, they was like, "No, you guys stay here." And essentially, this was led kind of almost to the Revolutionary War. One of the reasons why it led to the Revolutionary War. especially when they started taxing them because they fought that French and Indian War with them. But we gonna get to that in a later bit. So this border established by Great Britain in order to avoid conflicts between the American colonists and the Native Americans. That's why they call this the Proclamation Line of 1763. Uh, and here we are talking about how when people came into this country, the colonists, when they shipped over to the country, they landed along the border or the coastline of of um, North America. Notice how all of the colonies were put up here. We have Jamestown, that was in Virginia. We have Plymouth, which was in Massachusetts, and we have New Amsterdam, that was actually in New York. These are all examples of how developments were created essentially along the coastline. And these colonies were divided into three major colonies. One, the New England colonies, where it influenced for good harbors, abundant forests, the rocky soil, and the growing season was really short. So there were factors, geographic factors, that influenced the economy of New England, where it's just great for trade and manufacturing. Uh, they had small villages and town hall meetings simply because they didn't have a lot of large land for them to farm. So they had the small farms. They had commercial fishing, and they were the first to have American college, which is not really important when it comes down to the U.S. Regents. Then we had the southern colonies. Now here is very important to know that the southern colonies had a major impact on the history of the United States before the 1860s, because this region provided most of the agricultural products. Agricultural simply means like farming and stuff like that. And these products were processed in North, and they were sold like in Europe, pretty much. They developed plantations, which was large farms that were used for slave labor because of the fertile land and the long growing season. That's what most important, is the fact that there's a long growing season. If there wasn't, this growing season was short like it was in New England, then they wouldn't have been able to grow all these crops. So therefore, the southern colonies were the main colonies in terms of making a lot of the money, whereas the New England colonies, it was just good for fishing and trading and stuff like that with the Europe. So you can understand that the New England colonies really favored being in Europe or Great Britain. They loved Great Britain because they traded with them. Here's an example of this trade where the southern colonies, we have Maryland and Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These were long growing seasons. Like, no, this is the South. This was the southern colonies. This is where they grew a lot of its crops. And what they did with the crops was they sold them to places up in Europe, and the like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York were more of the northern or the New England colonies, where they had factories and stuff where they actually made things, because their soil was so hard they couldn't farm at all. So they used the geography around them in order to survive. So that's how their economy was. And lastly, in this lesson, we're gonna learn about Great Plains. And the Great Plains didn't come to America not until Thomas Jefferson was in the 1800s. When we'll talk more about that when we talk about the Louisiana Purchase. But this is relatively a flat, grassy region of the United States between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. And this is the Great Plains. The states with the largest percentage of land used for agriculture are located in the areas that was relatively flat terrain. The Great Plains existed from the Rocky Mountains and the Mississippi River. This is where the Great Plains took place. And the reason why the Great Plains was like the bread and basket in the United States, simply because this was like a really flat terrain where the largest plantations existed here in the Great Plains. A lot of the farming, a lot of the crops, and then they sold them into market, and they used the Mississippi River to transport a lot of the goods and crops needed so it can spread out through the rest of the colonies. But like I said before, remember that the Great Plains wasn't part of America not until the 1800s. So at this point in time, which we are talking about right now, this is just the 13 colonies. And remember that they had this proclamation line that existed right at the Appalachian Mountains where the colonists could not move to could move west of the Appalachian Mountains.